you very much. Hopefully it will. Okay. Grazie mille. Grazie Giovanni, Rita, per avermi invitato e mi scuso che aver tenuto la presentazione in inglese, non in italiano, e che la prossima volta lo farò. I will try. Okay, so thank you very much again for the invitation. And I need to perhaps start by explaining my motivation in presenting this particular. Once again, they ask me whether I want, accetta, I guess. Yeah? Questa, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, accetta. Okay. So I should probably explain my motivation of this particular presentation and this particular corpus and this particular philosopher, Joannes Cottunius. So as Rita mentioned in her introduction, for the good part of the past 10 years, I'm working on the works and on the philosophy of Elijah del Medigo. By the way, just how much time do I have? So neto speak.
15 minutes or an hour.
Yeah, okay. I'll push. It will be less than 1 hour, I promise. So I've been working on the works of Elijah del Medigo, who was a Jewish philosopher, and actually in modern historiography is perceived mainly as a Jewish philosopher, but who was living in Padova in the 15th century. And once I started more than 10 years ago looking into the works of del Medigo, I saw that he was actually conversing more with his non-Jewish, so non-Jewish Latin Christian contemporaries rather with his fellow Jewish Padovans. He actually did get along very well with his fellow Jewish Padovans, and he was really part of a Padovan Aristotelian community, which sort of transcended the boundaries of religion in the case of Del Medigo. So to make a long story short, because of my occupation with Del Medigo, I really became curious with the whole circle of the late Middle Ages, Renaissance, and then working on the usual suspects, so Vernia, Pomponazzi, etc. But then, and here I'm coming to Cotonius, realizing that there was much action going on and many treatises written in the 15th, 16th, and as we shall see today, 17th century, which were literally never studied, or as in the Cottunius, where people have studied, and there is a relatively recent PhD work written on his thought. Still, these are general historiographical surveys rather than an in-depth analysis of their philosophical works. So, having realized all that, I developed a sort of, something that I was hoping to share with you, but again, there were some technical difficulties, so maybe it's better even if I just describe, because it's really still a work in progress. I've developed an online platform, a digital platform, to both document, and you here have seen it, to both document and analyze the Paduan commentaries on Aristotle's physics written between the 5th and the 17th century. And the idea in this platform database is that it's not like a repository, it's also active tool in which once a certain commentator is referring to his fellow commentator, you are sort of directly sort of being directly from one commentator to another and back to Aristotle, forth to the commentators. And it sort of brings up in a lively mode the tapestry, which was the Paduan Aristotelian tradition. So just trying to bring all these commentaries and commentators to discuss among themselves. So that's one thing that I've been working on, so just establishing the database. But this is just the structural aspect. And there is also research to be done on the individual commentators. And Cotonius for me is a step in that direction. So working on Paduan Aristotelian, who wrote what seems to me a fascinating commentary on Aristotle's physics that was not studied up until today. Okay, so that's sort of the introduction. Also sort of an apologetic introduction in the sense that this is really, whereas with Del Medico and the other Paduan Aristotelians I've been working for quite a while now, with it's really still a work in progress. So yeah, whatever comments, I'm sort of opening the door to any comments that you may, and actually either through digital form or people who are here to receive your comments and visualization. Okay, so far for the general introduction. Now, I want to, perfect. Okay, so here you have some general biographical details concerning Cottunius. As you can see, his name has various, except of in Italian, where it's always Giovanni Cottonio. In the Greek sources and in the Latin, you find various. So if you don't find him online, don't give up. Try other spelling options. He was born in Veria, which was then part of the Ottoman Empire. Today, it's the northern part of Greece. An area that Cotonius was born already was under Ottoman hold for several centuries, but his family and his background was Greek speaking, and that's a significant fact to which I shall return. He traveled all throughout Europe. He also spent a significant period of time in Bologna, but finally he landed in Padova, where he spent a good part of his professional life. He was teaching in Padova for like 25 years. He established a college for Greek students in Padova in the same year where he wrote the physics commentary that we will discuss today. And he was not the successor of Cesare Cremonini. If you Wikipedia Cottunius, that's the first thing they tell you, and that is a lie. According to the recent PhD work that I mentioned, a very nice, very pleasant, fun reading on your way home. It's available online. Tatiana Bovo, I sort of hoping she would be here today, but we've never met and I haven't contacted her, so why would she? But it's really a very nice piece of scholarship. And Tatiana Bovo really establishes in a very convincing way much of his biography. And again, this is part of this collaboration that I think should take place more and more. So people who are specialists on intellectual history, etc. So look at the documents at Archivo di Stato, places that personally I really feel lost, and establish biographical details, and then the philosophers or historians of philosophy should collaborate regarding the philosophical analysis. And in her PhD, actually, when she refers to philosophical and Aristotelian materials, she says, well, I have nothing much to, so yeah, we should really collaborate. Again, just a general. So these are the basic details concerning Cottunius's life, or sort of his intellectual biography. Constructed, died in Padova, and buried in the Basilica not far from here. So before I move to the actual works of Cottunius, I would like to say really a final, because I have 50 minutes, so I feel sort of that I can make more than one preliminary comment. I'd like to say one comment, or sort of open a question, something which will remain an open question, also by the time that I finish discourse, and again, something that I would love to hear your feedback. There is something which both Cottunius and Elijah Del Medico mentioned before, which I studied for the good part of the past 10 years, have in common, apart from both operating in Padua. Both of them came from Greek background. Elijah Del Medico, there is a way to, if not, then it's okay. If there is a way of minimizing the volume, or not really, okay. Like a mute button or something? Or... maybe here, no? Yeah. This, yeah. Okay. The way down, maybe. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. So, but both, and as I said, that's the last preliminary remark, but I think it's an important one, or just as a point to consider. Both of them from a Greek-speaking background. Elijah del Medigo, who was born at the end of the 15th century, was born in Crete, which was then under Venetian control. So he was sort of a son of the Venetian Republic, whereas Cotunius was born in the Ottoman Empire. However, both came from a Greek-speaking background. And the interesting thing about them is that once both of them arrive to Padova and start to write their Aristotelian works, not only that they write Aristotelian works, but both sort of speak Padovan. What do I mean by speak Padovan? They ask very simple questions regarding the unicity of the intellect, regarding intelligible species, regarding the commentaries of Averroes. They refer to their sources. Both of them refer to their Padovan contemporaries and Padovan predecessors. So both of them very much belong to a tradition. Del Medigo didn't have an official post, probably being Jewish at the university. Nonetheless, both of them are really immersed in the tradition. So this for me opens the question, what does this, since we're discussing the history of Padova, 800 years, etc. So what does this fact tell us about Padova as an institutional tradition and as an intellectual institute? Does it tell us something about the intellectual flexibility of Padova that throughout the years was able to receive this type of exotic creatures, yes, breaking from all the edges of the empire and sort of embrace it into its bosom? Or does it actually tell us some kind of intellectual and institutional rigidness? So if you want to have an academic career in Padova, there are certain questions that you should ask, and you should do it in a way, and you should be sort of belong to a certain tradition. So for me, it's a really striking fact that scholars who worked in Padova from the Middle Ages up until the early modern period are really sharing a common discourse. And this shared common discourse, again, can be in all sorts of certain ways. Again, these are questions having to do more with sociology of knowledge, perhaps. And yeah, if you have some thoughts and comments, you who deal more with these aspects, I will be very curious. But now I want to sort of move towards what I was invited to speak and what is more sort of under the of my expertise, which is the philosophical analysis of Aristotle's physics in Cotonius's work. So again, from Bovo's PhD, we know that Cotonius wrote 4 commentaries on Aristotle's works while in Padova. So here you have a listing of 3 of them, the 3 late ones. So 51 on the logic works, 53 on the Decailo, 58. Of course, you cannot be a Padovan Aristotelian without writing a commentary on the De Anima. So actually, of his death, we also see that there is a De Anima commentary by Cottunius. But the commentary that I would like to discuss today is this one on the physics, published in 48, the same year that Cottunius established his Greek college for Greek students here in Padova. And needless to say, I really thought it would be nice. I mean, for sure, many of you are familiar with the covers of these commentaries, but it's always nice to see sort of Venetian Baroque at its, yeah. Again, I don't have the tools to analyze all the details of this wonderful image, but we are definitely in Venice. And although it's interesting to see that perhaps unusually we have several examples such as this, that the work was actually printed in Padova, as you can see, and Venice. But still, of course, the context is clear. So let us discuss this commentary. You have a hand. I hope all of you have it. Please still do not look at the handout. So before I look at the particular question that I would like to analyze, just some general details about this commentary. It holds round about 700 pages, so sort of a hefty commentary. It concerns, so it's 700 pages, only concerning the three first books of 6, and it is built as a series of questiones, and regarding to sort of very familiar themes regarding physics, causality, the definition of nature, creation, whether nature is an active or a passive principle, etc. This question that I would like to present to you today, and you can see on the screen and also on your handout, you can see it on the top. Yeah, it starts at page 30, the Obiecto Philosophia Naturalis. So a really classic one, and which is often nodding from the starting with ancient commentator mentioning. So what is the subject of physics? And when I came across this question, what really struck me, and it really almost literally struck me, is the incredible wealth and the material which Cotunius has at his disposal and feels very comfortable to juggle with. So Cotunius is showing no less than 8 potential replies to this question of what could be the subject. Yeah, and small, of course, I didn't, you never translate the Latin when you're in Italian context, so I don't want to offend no one and I don't want no one to correct me. So, but ens mobile, so these are very sort of very common scholastic notions. Is it a mobile, a moving being, or perhaps a natural body, or perhaps a moving body? So not only are these scholastic distinctions, these are very refined distinctions, as you can see. And every potential explanation is attributed to at least one, and in most cases to more than one source. So the subject matter of physics ens mobile, Cottunius, as thought Aquinas, Averroes, and other outside the Thomistic school. Is it corpus naturale, he asked, as thought Contarini? So some of these names may be half familiar of you, some of them not familiar at all. Is it corpus mobile? So we can see that the interesting thing listing of names is that you can see you have, again, the usual suspects: Aquinas, Averroes, Avicenna, Albertus Magnus. No Augustine, unfortunately. Don't take it personally, Giovanni, but he is referring, by the way, to Augustine on the question of creation, so you can, your mind can rest it. It is. What is interesting that when you count, there are only 6 canonical medieval, you have, so Avicenna, you can count, there are 6, from Aquinas to Avicenna, to Averroes, or to Gilles of Rome. Let's say that he's also a canonical source, and Scotus, of course, but the vast majority of the sources are 15th century forward, and some of them are contemporaries of Cottunius in Padova at the time that he's writing. So this is really something very fresh and very alive, and you can really see the tradition at play. I have to say one thing about, I have absolutely no time to go to all of them. Obviously, I'm going to say a very general observation. However, concerning point 5, this worth, I'm really opening a bubble, because this really worth an independent research. When he speaks about ens naturale being the potential subject matter of natural philosophy, attributes it to Francesco di Toledo. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Francesco di Toledo. He was a Jesuit philosopher who lived a bit before Cottunius. And Cottunius, when I compared both treatises, he is, I don't want to, you don't use the word plagiarism when you speak about pre-modern philosophy. That's very anachronistic, but he borrows a lot. He really borrows a lot. He's referring to him by name, so that's fine, but really it's like word by word. And so for me, it's not about plagiarism or not, but it's very, very interesting concerning the impact that sort of Iberian thought, because this Francisco de Toledo actually was a Collegio Romano. So the indirect impact that Iberian thought had on Padova via Rome, I actually think that there are studies going on concerning that. But if I go back to my main discourse, it's just this list of names that he's opening. It's just, you can write 30 articles, and I'm exaggerating. So that incredible wealth of materials only at the level of presentation. So that would be interesting in itself, but that's not what I wanted to show you. I want to say something a bit more significant, and that's what I would try to do in the time I have left. Time I drink, you can again just make yourself familiar with the list. And now I, as I said, trying to go into a detail, and I also want to give a more sort of an interesting general argument rather than painstaking analysis of all of them. So I will just tell you that already at the start of his discussion, Cotunius is dividing the arguments into two, the first 5 and the last 3. 3, he throws outside the window immediately, but really like in the first few passages, concerning both the 6, the 7, the 8, he says that, well, it's more, he says something like it's not even worth discussing these views at length. And sorry, where am I? Okay, so for example, concerning the 6th view that the subject matter of natural philosophy is nature as a whole, so everything possessing nature is subject matter. And this Cotonius says, well, composites, for example, so composite beings, of course, possess nature. Yeah? So nature relate to them at some, but nature relates to them at some point. But what is nature is the fundamental elements. So if which comprise these composite beings. So you can say that a composite, qua composite, is the subject matter of nature. He has a similar objection to the view of Marco Genoa, it's number 8. So corpus naturale mixtum ut mixtum est. So that's the subject matter. And for concerning this ut mixtum est, Cotonius says, well, it's absolute nonsense to say that we start the investigation at the composite or as the mixture level, because when you study nature, you study, for anyone who read the first few chapters of De Generatione, for example, of course, we speak about elements, okay, maybe also composites, but certainly we shouldn't exclude elements. So to say that mixtures as such are the subject matter is, we don't spend much time. And he has a very nice, elegant objection to number 7. And so this I would like to open up a bit. So how many of you heard, maybe we can make, how many of you have heard of Boethius Raguseus? Okay, lovely, no one, I was really hoping. He is a Croatian philosopher. And again, the wonderful places that Paduan Aristotelianism takes you, I realized working on this paper and on working on Cottunius, that there is actually an entry at the Routledge Encyclopedia of Renaissance Philosophy for Croatian Renaissance philosophy. And wow, there was a real, yeah, so maybe it was my ignorance, but there was a lot of activity going on in Croatia. This was a Croatian philosopher born in Dubrovnik, if I'm not mistaken, and I think he was born in Dubrovnik, and his life mission was to struggle astrology, or to struggle views concerning astral determinism. And one way to combat astrology is to, well, the whole, as you can see, it's 7, and we don't speak, we only speak about generable and corruptible beings. We don't speak about eternal beings, hence we don't speak about heavenly bodies. So once we take out heavenly bodies from of natural philosophy, we don't need to be so worried about us. So we sort of remove astral influence from our discourse. Yeah, we say that we speak about 2 independent realms of natural procedures here and procedures relating to the eternal there. So this attempt to separate generable and corruptible as to nature and to natural science, and what is eternal as perhaps to metaphysics, but not to nature. So to that, as I said, a very elegant reply. Cotunius simply says, well, Aristotle wrote the Decalogue, which belongs in our corpus, at least, to the Libris Naturalis. And we know that many Renaissance, so after the Renaissance, Paduan authors wrote commentaries, including Cottunius himself, on the Decalogue, on the Substantia Orbis. So a separation of generable and corruptible on the one hand, and the eternal as separating what is natural from what is not natural, was something that for us was outrageous. Even if you didn't follow, or you were not particularly interested in all the aspects and all the elements of these arguments, again, the important point is that 3 views are removed from the discourse immediately at the beginning, and we are left with 5 views. So you have 5 candidates to what can be the subject matter of natural science. And Cotunius really makes this he moves step by step, and he says, now having removed these ridiculous views almost without much discussion, let's turn to the more interesting 5 views. And then and Cottunius is obviously a scholastic Aristotelian, so we are deep in the discourse and we are sort of led by him, and I was led by him when I was reading it. And when he says, okay, now we're going to really read the 5 views that have some value and that require discussion, or sort of, okay, now we're going to have a sort of a tasty, good whole scholastic discussion. How surprised we are, therefore, that we're moving to this, to discuss these 5 views. Cottunius begins his discussion by saying the following: omnes ille voces re ipsa idem significant. So they all say the same. Essentially, okay, res mobile, corpus mobile, they all mean the same. Yeah? He really, and he repeats it several times. So at this point, the reader is at a somewhat confused or even frustrated state, because if we are here to read a scholastic treatise, and he made this very impressive 8-fold division, maybe corresponding to the 800 years of Padova. So if he's making this division and attributing to each view all of these splendid names, so he's really setting the stage to something really exciting, then it's quite underwhelming what's happening immediately after. 3 views out, 5 views he's himself, they more or less the same. Then why is he setting the stage so nicely? For what? And finally I to what is my main claim, and and it's really a hypothesis. My hypothesis is that Cottunius is not only searching for the subject matter of natural philosophy, although he is also attempting to make a point, a methodological point, about how to make scholastic philosophy in the 17th century, when you have Descartes here and Pomponazzi here, sort of breathing down your neck. That's my hypothesis. And by the way, I forgot to mention, if I can go back to this this is published 1648. Descartes' Meditazione was published 7 years prior to that. So we are in a post-Descartes era. So we are deep into early modern scholasticism. What we see in this Quaestio is how to do scholasticism in that era. And now I will try to convince you that I am right. So, and in order to convince you, we need to go back and we need to go back to the starting point. So, yeah, so if we go back to the beginning, Cotunius is asking the subject matter of natural philosophy. He's setting out this nice list of views. And then he says the views that matter. So and let's really put out we also, so out the window, the three views that he thinks are futile, English, but the views which he thinks hold some value, he says, well, they all say more or less the same. So that's where we were and why he's in it. The next move in his discourse, I think, really shows what he's trying to do. Next, he's turning to Aquinas, and he says, I want to speak about Aquinas. After I said that they all mean more or less, and he shows really, I have some examples here, but maybe we can, in the questions section, refer to some examples, how he shows that they all say more or less the same thing, or refer more or less to the same subject matter, not more or less, that they all designate the same subject matter. He then say, okay, let's speak about ens mobile and let's speak about Aquinas. We know that for Aquinas, ens mobile, so mobile being, is the subject matter of natural philosophy. But then Cottunius is telling us, Pomponazzi and others have pointed to alleged contradiction in the works of Aquinas, who sometimes uses ens mobile and sometimes uses corpus naturae. How do we answer those who point to this contradiction? And this is the crucial point. And again, I want to cite Cottunius. When answering Pomponazzi, Cottunius could have said what we just saw, that he said, well, Pomponazzi, actually, there is no contradiction because it doesn't matter what term he uses. But he doesn't say that. He doesn't say it doesn't matter what term we use. And for Cottunius, the fact that all these 5 terms, scholastic notions have designation, doesn't mean that we can use all of them without differentiation. Rather, Cottunius is answering Pomponazzi. Is sometimes using ens mobile, sometimes corpus naturae, sometimes perhaps a different notion, prout magis congruit materia, whatever the discussion requires. And Cottunius himself sort of goes with Pomponazzi. He says, yes, I know, I've also encountered it, and it's true. And for example, in the physics, this is Cottunius, Aquinas indeed uses ens mobile, because there he refers to the res communissima, and in the Decailo, he's using corpus naturale. He still speaks about the subject matter of physics, but in the Decailo, it's more fitting, because of the context, because of the discussion, to speak about corpus naturale and not ens mobile, because in the Decailo we speak about, because in the Decailo, corpus naturale, magis congruit corpus quam ens. When you speak about moving bodies, yeah, it's eternal moving bodies, it's more fitting the context and it has a nicer flow. In terms of the notation, there is no essential difference. And I sort of, again, opened the door that some may already jump in, oh, he's contradicting himself, because a second before you said that there is no difference in the notation whatsoever. And here it seems that he is making some sort of differentiation. Maybe one can square Cottunius's logic, but that's not my interest here. I really want to, and now I will, all these threads which are a bit here and there, I will put in and bring them together. What is the motivation of Cottunius? I think, and again, maybe I'm reading a lot into, but this is sort of a hefty question itself. So I think one is, it's allowed to read something into the question. I think that what Cottunius tries to make with all these comments about terminology, he tries to do the following. First, these comments about terminology are not essential for the course of his discourse, I would say. So he's really trying to make something else. Argue that Cottunius attempts to preserve a tradition by introducing certain adjustments in the face of hostile reactions. These hostile reactions may be by fellow Aristotelians like Pomponazzi, so fellow scholastics, and not to mention those who are opposing the scholastic tradition. And either Pomponazzi, so within the Aristotelian tradition or outside the Aristotelian tradition, a very common anti-scholastic blame was aimed at scholastic terminology. And the claim was that scholastic definition or scholastic terminological definitions and refinements do not correspond to any real differences in the outside world, that this is just play with words. Yeah? So Cotunius is here in a tough position. If he sticks to this division to say it's either ens mobile, so it's either mobile, and if it's ens mobile, it cannot be corpus naturae. And if it's corpus naturae, so if it's sort of an exclusive division, one choice exclude all the 7 others, is being a good scholastic, a good rigid scholastic, but in the 17th century, that made a bit too rigid, even to Pomponazzi, not to mention to Descartes. So if you sort of stick to these divisions for your life, and for you, these terminological divisions also represent ontological divisions in sort of a 1-to-1 ratio, again, that's perhaps may seem like good old scholasticism, but in the 19th century, it may be perceived almost as ridiculous. On the other hand, if all that you are saying, these divisions don't mean nothing, they don't make any actual difference whatsoever, then you're being too much carried away towards the not the anti-Aristotelian, but the anti-scholastic terminology. Those who are defining scholastic terminology. So in this quaestio, and again, I say it in advance, is an attempt to preserve the tradition while answering potential criticism, not potential, actual and potential criticism. And how do you preserve a tradition while being aware to criticism? Not committing, what's the word? By suggesting a reform. And the reform that I see Cotunius doing or proposing here is a sort of a terminological reform by saying, although Aquinas 90% of the time uses ens mobile, the places where he uses corpus naturalis, we shouldn't jump and say, what's happening here? Is Aquinas contradicting himself? Perhaps it's something in the manuscript tradition that got wrong. No, we may say no. Aquinas himself had the comfort to at times use that terminological, term, and at times to use that term. And if Aquinas himself felt the ease and the comfort to do the 13th century, it will be very ridiculous if 400 years later, in the 17th century, we are clinging fast to divisions which Aquinas himself was feeling comfortable. Okay, so I hope that I'm really arriving at the conclusion stage now, and I hope that my presentation, both of the facts and of the presentation, was clear enough. So I will just try to recap now. It was less than 1 hour, I think. So again, Cottunius is a scholastic Aristotelian. That's nothing. I mean, you just open any, definitely if you open the physics commentary, but if you open any of his Aristotelian commentaries, it's something that strikes you immediately. He belongs to the scholastic Aristotelian tradition. However, he is the son of the 17th century. And at least in the quaestio that I wanted to present to you today, him being a son of the 17th is not so much in trying to introduce new material or to push new agenda into the quaestio, but rather in a certain attitude towards the achievements that came before him. metaphor that I had, and with this metaphor, I would like to conclude this argument, rather than, again, looking at these divisions as excluding one another, he is referring to them as objects in a toolkit, yeah? Or like a painter who has different types of paints, and he can make certain shades, sometimes green, sometimes blue, sometimes he can mixes them. And this type of flexibility, yeah, is what could keep things standing in front of strong winds that we know are blowing in the 17th century. Again, I'm opening the door. You may say that I'm reading a lot into one. I am planning to contextualize it more, and maybe I will find things that will defy this hypothesis. But I would like to really conclude with another type of evidence that sort of, I think, supports my reading. And this really brings us back to the point I started with. Cotonius came from a Greek-speaking background. Cotunius not only came from a speaking background, he wrote Greek poetry, he established a Greek college here in Padova, and he was very much involved in the PhD dissertation I mentioned before, very much deals with his being part of what is sometimes perceived as a Greek Renaissance as part of the Italian Renaissance, so Greeks living in it. So he was very much immersed within the Greek language and culture, also in relation to Aristotle. So in several places, and in the quaestio that immediately followed what I just showed you, which refers to the title of 6, he is citing from the Greek of Aristotle, and as we know already from the 17th century, Padovan and Venetian typography allowed you to include Greek words in Latin text. So he is able of doing so. So why? And asking, what is the subject matter of natural philosophy? One way of doing that would be to say, well, Aristotle said to bring the Greek, to show sort of ex cathedra, to show you can read the original Greek. You come from a Greek-speaking Greek. And to close the story, so to speak, there is not a single Greek word in the entire discussion, you know, and there are close to 20 names all associated with the Latin. And this goes back to what I said at the beginning. This is really an internal Latin scholastic discussion, and involving Greek, it will destroy. It's like when you see people arguing and there is a value in their argument, it's almost as if, okay, I know the answer, but I will ruin something if I will tell them the answer. So he doesn't want to build the discussion by saying what Aristotle, because this discussion for him is too valuable, so to speak. And in that, again, I'm going with a thesis of Bovo, if I understand correctly, that it was really two parallel worlds for him. So Aristotle as a Greek author who should be ready, etc., but the scholastic tradition, the Latin Padovan tradition, was something that had a value sort of over and above Aristotle. And I think that this quaestio is really about that. However, and this will be really my concluding word, however, as I said, a quaestio after that, he is starting by citing the Greek Aristotle. So there is an immense wealth in Cottunius. There is as I said, one may write 30 articles. I really feel that and I'm sorry that you are the victims of that, but I feel that to an extent, this is really work in progress and that I'm scratching the surface. So one may write 30 articles concerning this quaestio alone. It's a 700 pages book only on the 3 first books of the physics. So one can write 300 articles on this. And this is just one, and I wanted to share, but again, technical difficulties, of tens of Paduan commentaries on the physics. And I do not exaggerate, tens, that no one or very little have looked into. So there is a lot, and I really feel sort of begeistert, excited when I encourage myself and encourage all of you to dedicate your life to the study of the Paduan Aristotelian tradition. There's a lot to do and a lot to discover. Thank you very much.